Good morning, everyone. My name is Susan Madera, and I'm the director of the Common Read at Queensborough Community College. I would like to thank Dr. Robin Ford, who's the faculty coordinator of the Common Read as well. And I especially want to thank Dr. Lesham, who is the director of the Kupferberg Holocaust Resource Center and Archives. We thank him very much for allowing us to use this beautiful space this morning. The Common Read is one of the high-impact practices at Queensborough Community College. It's a common intellectual experience. Currently, over 1,300 students on campus are reading Rosie Perez's memoir. And we're offering over 30 events within a 4-week period. We're currently in week 3. Today, we have a very exciting event. Perez and Perez, exploring the trauma and recovery of Ben and Rosie. I'd like to introduce Dr. Cary Lane, who will be offering this presentation today. Let's hear it for Dr. Lane.
Hi, everybody. This is, first of all, thank you for coming. And thank you to the professors who brought you, and Professor Yee, and Professor Cimino, and Professor Schrinemakers. And a few of my students are here, so thank you for coming. I'm sitting on a stool today because I sort of envision this event as an interactive one when we're going to speak with each other, we're going to ask questions of each other, and we're going to actually do some writing today. I have some writing prompts, so we'll speak for about 45 minutes together, and then we'll write and reflect on what we think about what we've been discussing and what we've seen in the galleries and what we've been reading in our classes. So an event like this is, this is one of the cooler things about being in college, is an event like this where you can interact with other professors, students, and in fact, you might even, as you advance in your English courses or your college courses, you might even take some of the professors who are here today. So this is a good chance for you to get to know some other professors in the department that you might actually be taking. So really this is a wonderful opportunity for us to sort of explore Rosie Perez's book, the exhibit, which I know most of you have gone to, and to hear about what you've been thinking about and what you've been writing about, and maybe some other things you've been reading, because that's all valid in terms of what we're going to be discussing today. So I just want to thank you for coming. I want to make this a very interactive event. I want to hear from you. We have microphones. Professor Yee and Ray over here have microphones. So at any point, if when you want to participate, just raise your hand and then a microphone will be in your hand. And so I want to keep this very casual, even though there's a camera right here and a camera right here. Let's have a discussion about this, because this is a very interesting and important topic. So when Susan Madera asked me to do an event like this, it was, at first, it's, in a way, it might be hard to compare the trauma and the recovery and the perseverance of a Nuyorican woman who is still alive with a Lithuanian Jew who survived the Holocaust and who was born in 1926. But the more we think about it, and the more I researched about it, there is a lot in common between these two, besides their name, which is also an interesting story. So thus the name of the event. Perez and Perez, exploring the trauma and recovery of Ben and Rosie. So one thing I want to avoid today is a talk of maybe whose trauma was worse or who suffered more. I don't think that's a very productive thing to be talking about today, because when you think about trauma or adversity, it's not really helpful to sort of say, well, one had it worse, or one could be expected to recover easier. Trauma and recovery doesn't really work like that. There are instances where someone might seemingly might be deemed a light amount of trauma, but react far more severely or have a far more strong reaction, and then there are those who actually endure a lot of trauma that might not show as many symptoms. So I don't think that's something that's terribly important in terms of when we're comparing Rosie and Ben. But I do think I want to cover one thing is, excuse me, let me advance the slide. Oops. I think to give an overview, I think it's important that we take a look at two pieces of film that might refresh your memory about the exhibit and one that might refresh your memory about the book. We'll start with Ben Perez's film on PTSD. So.
This was part of a Holocaust survivor's identity. Both their number and their uniform was their identity. And I think that many survivors felt that nobody would believe the inhumanity that they had experienced and the persecution, and so that they wanted something concrete to hold on to in order to be able to tell the world what they had suffered. You know, he had a normal childhood, and then all of a sudden everything is taken away from you. He had no photographs of his life before the Holocaust. There were no family heirlooms that he had, nothing that he had written. So it's part of losing your identity, the identity that you had before the Holocaust. And so this is something, a part of his identity that he can hold on to. Ben lost his father when he was 11 years old. His brother was 4 or 5 years older than him, and so he became a surrogate father to Ben. In a way, he lost his father twice. And very often when Holocaust survivors lose somebody that close and dear, there is a lot of survivor guilt. Why did I survive? Why was my brother killed? What is it about me that God enabled me to survive and not him? In 1952, the German government was forced into giving reparations to Holocaust survivors. But the whole reparation system almost replicated persecution in one way or another. The Germans would look for all kinds of ways not to give the reparation. So for example, in Mr. Perez's situation, the mother asks to get reparations for the son that they killed. And so the German authorities ask her for a letter of witnesses of who saw the Germans killing her son. Now we have to remember that that the Germans took 300 Jews, they took them into the middle of the forest, they had a pit all prepared for them, and they all shot them. So who was left to be a witness from those 300? So did they ask for impossible kinds of documentation, and therefore if you don't have a witness that we killed your son, so therefore, you know, we didn't kill your son. The Germans did not want to give any reparations for psychological help. Now with Mr. Perez's situation, I mean, he had headaches all the way from the time he was in the ghetto, and these headaches he continued to have at least 2 or 3 times a week that impaired him from working. He had to lie down when he got the headaches. This is physical damage, and even then he still had to fight with them for so many years till they finally gave him some reparations. He survived, his brother did not survive. There is this feeling of, I must have survived for a reason. So one of the things that keeps you going is, I survived for a reason. I have to make the best of my life because God gave me a life. The other wonderful thing that happened in Mr. Ben Perez's life is that he found a wonderful wife. a nurse, a very caring woman who understood him psychologically, who was there for him, who was very supportive. And I think the whole idea of having children for Holocaust survivors after the Holocaust is this feeling of, you see Hitler, you didn't win after all. And you see this continuity of the Jewish people. And in fact, Mr. Perez has children who are engaged in Jewish life, and that this is an important part of their identity. I'm sure that the Perez children did not hear very much from their father about, what he had endured during the Holocaust. It's very difficult for a parent to want to be humiliated in front of their children. And a Holocaust survivor, when they talk about their experience, have to talk about all the humiliation that they experienced and how weak and helpless they were. And as a parent, you don't want to appear as weak and helpless in front of your child. Mr. Perez's children remember him as a happy guy who played with them, who took them on vacation to Florida, who enjoyed their birthday parties. They probably saw him dancing at family functions and maybe even singing. This is who he was on a daily basis. But of course, he had nightmares in which, he was either, being chased, or he remembered seeing his brother beaten up. He had physical symptoms of the headaches that he got very early on in the war when he was first in the ghetto. And so these physical symptoms, these psychological symptoms of, for example, of going to a doctor and seeing the doctor as a Nazi who wasn't really there to help him. These are the little intrusions that he had in life that you don't share with small children. Children of Holocaust survivors go through a mourning process very similar to a mourning if you've lost somebody dear to you, but children of survivors go through a mourning process of mourning somebody they have not known. And so finding Mr. Ben Perez's uniform is almost like a shock, if you will, which is the first level of mourning. You find out, so this is the shock of, gee, my father was a Holocaust survivor. Even though you knew it, it takes on a different resonance when you have something concrete to see. And then once he begins his life, you have the documentation with all the photographs that he takes. So he was into documentation. He wanted the world to know what he was experiencing. And obviously he wanted the world to know what he was suffering with the German reparation system, keeping everything so meticulous. So there is no question that he would want the world today to know what he had suffered.
So when Dr. Lesham and I, when we received these artifacts from the family was very surprised to see the extent to which his father was recovering from his trauma and bravely seeking help. And at first, the children, the shock of his treatment for his PTSD, although they didn't have that term back then when he was getting treatment, at first they were very reticent and hesitant to put these artifacts in the exhibit for everyone to see. But then the next morning, Dr. Lesham and I, we got an email, a call saying, you know what, my brother and I have thought about it and we want our father's treatment to be part of this exhibit, which I thought was extremely brave on their part and really helps move forward the discussion about trauma and recovery, So we're able to see Ben both as an extremely brave person, not only for surviving the Holocaust, but for actively seeking treatment for after his suffering. So that was really a wonderful moment when the children of Ben Perez decided that this should be public and that his treatment for PTSD be part of the narrative. Let's watch a quick film about Rosie Perez, too, just to provide an equal frame for what we're going to be talking about.
Rosie Perez, for her book, How I Survived, this is a long title, right? Yes, How I Survived Sister Renata and My Crazy Mother and Still Came Out Smiling with Great Hair.
Yes.
Nice to see you
Thank you. Nice
with great hair, right? In the preface, it says here that you didn't really want, I didn't really want to write about my life, but you did.
But I did, yes.
Why? Tell me what this is.
I think it was the timing. I intended to write a cookbook of my aunt's delicious recipes. And when I met with the book agent, he said, "What about your mother?" I said, "Oh, I don't discuss that." And he says, "Oh, we have to do this book." And I said, "No." And then I went away, and months later, I handed him a 100-page manuscript and proposal. And I think it was just timing. And I didn't want to write it because I was in the closet, if you will, about the child abuse that I had endured. Mm-hmm. And when I realized that I was still acting as a victim, even though I thought I had moved on.
Yeah.
Because if you're still in the closet,
right,
you know, you still have that stigma and that shame about it. And I just felt like, wait a minute, I've done so much therapy, I've worked so hard on myself, it's time.
And what you were in the closet about was abuse as a child, mm-hmm. a mother who had mental illness.
Yes.
And you were put into a children's home.
A children's home, a Catholic-run children's home.
Yeah.
It was a convent of nuns,
yeah.
and they had all these kids. Either they were unwanted, displaced, or orphan children, mm-hmm. and it was tough. It was really, really difficult. Specifically, when I found out that there was no need for me to be there, because my father wanted me, and my father's sister, my aunt Mingita, also wanted to take me as well, and my mother, because of her mental illness, refused, mm-hmm. and I stayed there.
And so you grew up with this feeling of abandonment, unwanted.
Yes.
And what did that do to you?
Made me very strong.
Made you very strong.
Yes, it made me very, very tenacious and focused, and I quickly realized, and in part because a few of the nuns, they always impressed upon me that I can change my circumstances, mm-hmm. and education is the key. And once they told me that, and they would say that to all of the children there, over and over and over, and it clink in my brain, and that was it. And I said, I'm going to get out of this situation.
But it's interesting. Explain this to me, because on the one hand, you say you were in the closet on
yes.
these issues, which suggests you were kind of keeping them hidden, in part even from yourself. On the other hand, it made you stronger.
Yes, on the outside.
Yeah.
But on the inside, there was a lot of pain, there was a lot of hurt,
yeah.
there was the feeling of abandonment was very, very prevalent,
yeah.
but I had built that wall, very, 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 very thick wall.
Yeah.
And, you know, in the mask that I wore, everybody, when I went out into the public, if you will, when I would have home visits with my aunt or my father in Puerto Rico or in Brooklyn, no one knew. No one knew. And my aunt kept it a secret, and so did my father. Mm-hmm. So I had this facade. I used to make up stories. I was the greatest liar in the world. Uh-huh. No one knew. Even as an adult, when I wrote this book and I passed it out to my very, very close friends, we had no idea.
And why did you keep it so secret, so hidden?
I kept this secret and hidden because one of the counselors at the convent, we called it a home, mm-hmm. the home.
Does anyone have any thoughts about, or have started to form a comparison between how Rosie, what we know about Ben and how Rosie sort of handled her trauma? Does anyone have a thought about just watching these two films? One of the things that strikes me is that how sort of vocal Rosie is about her empowerment now that she sort of came out and stopped pretending about her trauma and sort of vocalized and sought treatment actively for her trauma, and how that has sort of empowered her, and which is something throughout the book in her adult life. And I think the book itself is sort of a testament to her, you know, the strength that she sort of her ability to pivot from all this trauma into this sort of into a source of strength, and her ability to sort of articulate that is quite interesting. Ben, of course, grew up and sort of saw treatment in a different era where maybe PTSD wasn't even a sort of a clinical name at that point. And for men, it might be very sort of the stigma or the shame that they might perceive for seeking help might be very strong. So that generation gap between Rosie and Ben might be is something that we'll also be talking about today. One interesting anecdote, in speaking with Ben Perez's daughter, Dan Lesham and I visited her home. And for some reason, this was before I even knew that we were going to be doing the Common Read book, I asked her, after, Ben Perez's original name was Benzion Perezetsky. He was a Lithuanian Jew. And when he moved to the United States, he shortened that to Ben Perez. And I asked the daughter, I said, for whatever reason, and maybe I was just intuiting the fact that this would come up and we were going to be reading about Rosie, I asked Ben Perez's daughter, one growing up, was she ever sort of teased or discriminated, or was there any prejudice because her last name was Perez? And she said, in fact, there was. And she was teased. They thought she was Puerto Rican, or the students in her school thought she was Hispanic, even though she was Jewish. And that just shows you the sort of irony, or just how this crazy discrimination is, that we have a daughter of a Holocaust survivor who's Jewish, whose name is Perez, formerly Perezetsky, and people are teasing her because they think she's Hispanic. And then I think that sort of helps sort of join Ben and Rosie together. I got my slide advancer here. Okay. There was, when we're talking about perseverance, there are a lot of sort of articles and famous quotes from people like Mark Twain about perseverance, and I didn't think that was a very good way to frame this discussion today, so I found an authority, a medical doctor, she's a psychiatrist, who seems to be the preeminent authority in trauma and recovery. And so I want to frame our discussion today through the research of Dr. Herman, who teaches and practices at Harvard Medical School, and who's had decades of experience with helping those with post-traumatic stress disorder and helping them recover. Remembering and telling the truth about terrible events are prerequisites both for the restoration of the social order and for healing of individual victims. And I wanted to start with this thought because I think this is something that we as a group today can help with by having this discussion. I think gathering here today, and in fact, we are helping tell the truth, and we are reacting to the truth about these two victims of trauma. And so I wanted to start with that thought, that we're sort of, we're helping this cause today, and that's what was one of the missions I thought we should accomplish today, and sort of help tell the truth ourselves. We'll be ending this session with you reflecting, responding about your observations and your thoughts, and whether you want to do a poem or a regular reflection, that's fine. And what I would like to do is actually capture your writing and tape it to the wall of the exhibit. In the back, as you've probably noticed, there's a writing and reflection area, and maybe some of you have actually contributed to this already. I would like to add to that wall today, and that's part of the truth-telling that we'll be doing in exploring this very interesting duo of Rosie and Ben. So what we'll do is we'll look at about 8 of these slides with a quote from Dr. Herman, and then what I would like from you is a response of some kind, or maybe how you see how this fits into either Rosie or Ben, or maybe both. So let's start with this. Recovery begins always with safety. Who has a response to this in terms of Rosie and Rosie's recovery, or Ben's recovery in the terms of feeling safe first, then being able to recover? And just raise your hand and a microphone will be in your hand within 3 seconds. Who has a response to this? The idea of like recovering when things are safe.
Probably like when they mean by safety is like after all the trauma they endured is over. So if they tell the story, they won't get punished for saying what happened. So.
Very good. So it's like, think of an example in your life where you might be more inclined to seek help. Is there an example you can think of where safety provides a sense of comfort for you so that you can seek help for a problem you're having?
As a kid, I was like more of an outside kid. Like I love riding bikes, playing outside. And when I got hurt, I didn't want to go home because I know my mom would keep me in the house. Okay. So I'd stay out and like take the pain until it's time to go inside after the day is over.
Thank you. It's wonderful. How about in terms of Rosie and Ben? Oh, yeah, go ahead. Please.
For Rosie and Ben? I mean, like Ben, they both were like silenced because like Rosie as a child and Ben as a prisoner, so they didn't really have much to say or a right to say anything because they didn't have the power to say anything. So for them.
When do you think Rosie began to feel safe enough where she could actually start to seek treatment for her PTSD?
Probably when she became to stay on her own, like when she was
like in California,
yeah,
probably.
When she
yeah.
moved.
She had to escape. She had to go 3,000 miles away to sort of flee this dysfunction on the East Coast. So I think you're right.
Right. First of all, I think for Ben, when he lost his brother and he had to go with life on his own, he realized that his life, according to the film, had purpose, and that these memories, that the only ones that he has, because he lost every part of his life and his youth, that he's able to continue with, at least with the memory, that he has an identity, I think. And then for Rosie, I think the part when she realized that I have to go on, and because we're getting this trauma, and so that I'm going to leave this trauma that came from my parents.
And in fact, like Ben never went back to his homeland of Lithuania, okay? And he was in fact 15 years old when he was taken prisoner by the Nazis, okay? So he was in a ghetto, and then he was sent to Dachau, and then he was in a displaced persons camp. So Ben was also kind of a child too, and he lost his youth in many ways, you know? So I think those are very good points, and I want to thank you for comparing both of them. You know, in Ben's case, you know, his identity, and identity is one of the big themes in the exhibit, is that refinding his identity now that he couldn't go back to his homeland, I think is a big deal for him. After all, like he was a number. He was the number on his jacket was his identity for a year. And his name was misspelled throughout all the documents you see in the exhibit. His name was really sort of almost never spelled the same way twice. And it really wasn't until he got to the United States where he finally was able to get a new home after he got reparations for his suffering, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And he had, you know, solidly changed his name for one final time. I think it really wasn't until he got to the United States, and maybe even until he maybe got to Belmore, where he finally felt safe. Pass the microphone on.
Well, she talks about safety, and both in the book and in the story of Ben, it says that I saw that Rosie felt safe with her aunt. So I believe when she actually drove Tia, with her aunt Tia, when she got home, she basically tells that she wasn't able to really speak or to communicate, but with time, she started to open up and feel more regular. With Ben, well, it showed that his wife was really caring, and I believe that when he married her, he started to feel that there is somebody to take care of him. So maybe that was the start of feeling safe.
These are two excellent points, and I think your point that actually maybe her feeling of safety came even slightly before she moved out west or through her aunt, I think is a very good point. Ben was worried, and some of his documentation says that he was afraid he was never going to find somebody to marry who would accept him for who he was, which was, somebody dealing with serious trauma, who almost lost his life 3 or 4 times. But he did, and she was a nurse. I don't know if you know that. She was a nurse,
Yeah.
and she was a very caring and empathic person. So I think your points are wonderful. Thank you. Let's move to the next slide, and maybe, and those of you on my left here, just because you guys are more than welcome to contribute too. I know you didn't sign consent, but I do want to hear from you as well. In order to gain their freedom, survivors may have to give up almost everything else. Battered women may lose their homes, their friends, and their livelihood. Survivors of childhood abuse may lose their families. Political refugees may lose their homes and their homeland. Rarely are the dimensions of the sacrifice fully recognized. In the case of Rosie and Ben, I think all of these are true. Ben lost his homeland. Ben lost half of his family. Rosie lost half of her family. And friends. I think this is an important point because I think it speaks to the sacrifice that has to sort of happen before that survivors of trauma go through. And I think in both in Ben and Rosie's case, I think they both lost and sacrificed a lot. So this slide's about empowerment. What did we see from Rosie, or what did you read about Rosie or know about Rosie that speaks to her empowerment and her ability to seek treatment for her trauma? I'll open this up to you. Let's talk about Rosie for a second and the empowerment of the survivor. We saw a little bit in the film. What do we know about Rosie and her personality? What do we know about Rosie and her ability to sort of persevere in the face of severe trauma? And what is empowerment? What do you think is the relationship between Rosie's empowerment and her ability to persevere and recover? Does anyone have any thoughts on this? So I think one of the things to me that comes to mind is this sort of need for justice. Okay? The idea of justice is a very important thing for someone who chooses and who feels empowered enough to seek recovery. In Ben's case, how did he try to seek justice that you know of from the exhibit? In his reparations effort with the German government, I think this is when you have suffered so much and you're sort of given a choice. Well, you can sort of hide, or Rosie was saying, lie, pretend, put it, sweep it under the rug. I think when given that choice, I think what happens consistently with survivors, and Dr. Herman sort of reiterating this with this slide and with her quote, is that when you feel empowered, I think the drive for something more is there. And I think in Ben's case, his pursuit of justice is very important. The reparations effort with the German government. In proving to Hitler, as Dr. Fogelman said in the film, proving to Hitler that he did not get the best of him. And what about Rosie? What did Rosie writing the book, how does that speak to her empowerment? Like the idea of going very, very public with her trauma and admitting that she does have PTSD. This is a very brave thing to do. And I think both of them in this sense are sort of seeking justice. And they're seeking to sort of reestablish their identity as a survivor, as someone who's persevered. The traumatized person is often relieved simply to learn the true name of her condition. In Ben's case, they did not have there wasn't a formal diagnosis of PTSD. The doctors and the psychiatrists Ben worked with, of course, knew he had extreme anxiety and depression, and they knew that his trauma during the Holocaust was the cause of this. But if you recall in Rosie's book, in the preface, where she comes straight out and says it, I have PTSD, and this was a huge relief for me to find this out, that there was a diagnosis. And so sometimes knowing that you're not alone and that this is something that others with trauma have endured is something very comforting to someone who is the victim of trauma. And so the relief associated with a diagnosis that, yes, you were traumatized, yes, there is a condition called post-traumatic stress disorder that you suffer from. And this is, I think this is comforting to the person who's been traumatized. It lets them know they're not alone. Others have gone through this. There is hope. We can persevere after trauma. And Ben kind of never really had this luxury because he was seeking treatment in the 1950s and 60s. It was, PTSD wasn't formally used as a sort of a diagnostic, a clinical term. But for Rosie, I think she really used this diagnosis and I think in essence is helping others. Does anyone have additional thoughts on this? Or some comparisons they want to make with Ben or Rosie? The idea of Rosie embracing this diagnosis and then writing about it for all to see, I think is a very empowering thing. We talked about safety earlier. For those who are traumatized, safety, there's never total safety after you've endured a huge trauma. Something can always trigger a memory of your trauma. In Ben's case, even when he was seeking treatment for his PTSD, he encountered a nurse and a doctor who were very stern, and they were very strict, and to him, that sort of evoked all these negative memories of Nazis. And so in the gallery, Ben describes his terrible dealings with a doctor who acted just like a Nazi. So yes, safety is sort of the number one thing or the primary thing that one needs to sort of persevere, but at the same time, you're never 100% safe or comfortable. The trauma, reminders of the trauma are always very close at hand. What about Rosie in terms of, in the book, how did Rosie react when she dealt with adversity later in life? Does anyone remember anything from the book that's sort of where Rosie is sort of triggered a little bit or her behavior becomes different when she's faced with something that reminds her of her childhood trauma? Is there an instance that you can think of? Yes, ma'am. The microphone's coming to you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I just can say that I feel she became aggressive, and even though she can be really understanding woman, but her situation when she was little make her a little aggressive to people.
Yes, and do you think the fact that she admits that if she was triggered and she got loud and awful on people, do you think the fact that she recognizes that as something significant or helpful to her, that she knows she's doing it?
I don't think so. I mean, even though you realize you have a problem, but you have to a little bit trying to control yourself, even though there's moments that you cannot. But at a certain limit, you have to control it. I think
ideally, it would be nice if we could,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. At a certain point, you have to try.
So,
she might try. I mean, she might try, but I don't feel she is strong. But I read from the book that when she was working with the dancers, the girls, the fly girls, she was too hard too hard on them. I don't know if it's because Sister Renata, at home, or her mother, all those things triggered her. Maybe that's why she was very hard on.
Yeah, well, when she herself was given a position of authority,
Yeah, I
it's
think
almost like she reverted back to the authority that she only knew when she was growing up.
Maybe.
Or when somebody did something inappropriate, like, say, Don Cornelius from Soul Train, and when her reaction was throwing chicken bones at him, these are triggers.
I mean, you have to react. She just have to react.
We
back.
understand why she did it. It's not ideal, but I think this speaks to what Dr. Herman is saying, that these memories at any point, even in a safe environment, can trigger a reaction to those who have suffered a deep trauma like Rosie has, or like Ben has. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That was wonderful. We only have a couple more of these, and then I'll have some writing and reflection prompts, and then we'll write a little bit, and then I want to hear your writing. Here's a quote from Dr. Herman. Most people have no knowledge or understanding of the psychological changes of captivity. Social judgment of chronically traumatized people therefore tends to be extremely harsh. And there's a word called stigma or stigmatization, where something sort of, there's a public shame or a mark about, in this case, having post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's easy for those who have not been through trauma to sort of, just assume, oh, Ben survived the Holocaust. Isn't he lucky? Or Ben survived the Holocaust. Thank goodness, without thinking about, well, there's also a cost of surviving the Holocaust. He brings with him a lot of trauma, and a lot of pain that he has to then sort of come to terms with. Or maybe in your case a little bit, sort of when Rosie reacts, and she's triggered, and it's not pleasant to sort of see someone act aggressively, but there's a word called empathy, where we sort of can understand or feel someone else's pain that I think comes into play here. And I think what Dr. Herman is saying here is that society doesn't really fully they don't understand as well as they could that someone who's been through a trauma the way Ben and Rosie have, that they're transformed and that they deserve more empathy than we give as society. You have a follow-up? Yeah, please.
I feel for them because I myself, I have anxiety. And they might have been through way more than I am going through. And I am proud of them because they are strong, and I can take their experience to overcome my difficulties and illnesses. But at the end of the day, that's why I'm saying earlier, she could try more but maybe now she is trying to control herself better, But I feel that sometimes when people make me feel mad or make me feel sad, sometimes I cry inside. But it's really hard to control that.
And I think it's easier when those of us who have experienced some form of trauma or some sort of abuse,
Yes.
and maybe most of us have. I think it's when you live 20 to 25, or in my case 47 years, you get to encounter stuff like this.
Yeah, sure.
And
Definitely.
like you're saying, I think it's a wonderful point you're making. It's a little bit easier to relate to somebody who's going through something similar or worse when you've had a little taste of it yourself.
Definitely.
And I think do you think it's absolutely necessary to experience some sort of trauma to empathize?
Yeah, I would say.
It helps, but is it absolutely necessary, do you think?
No.
I think we can still be empathic people without
Yes,
experiencing.
we don't need, everybody doesn't need to feel that sentiment.
What about this one? And this one, Rosie comes to mind. What happened? Yes, we have a. Thank you.
Hello. I think Rosie's reaction is more like aggressive because at the end, she's just reacting to the wall that she create, as she says on the film. She could just be aggressive, but in the inside, she just don't want to be hurt again. That's how I think.
It's almost like a protective.
Exactly.
Yeah. Whereas Ben sort of went inward.
Yeah.
He didn't share it with his children. His children were very young, so maybe it was not appropriate for him to share this. Maybe this is something he and his mother shared with each other, maybe his wife. We're not quite sure to the extent. We know his mother, Ben and his mother, together sought reparations. But it's interesting that Rosie's sort of protective layer is sort of outward, as you're pointing out, and Ben's is a little bit more, he went inward. Yeah. That's
Maybe because also he didn't want to, like, his child to know or even, in a way, go through what he did. Just maybe give them a new life, a new beginning, sort of as he did, moving
It's
over
extremely
here.
brave on his part, don't you think, to protect his children like that? Even though he was enduring so much and the chronic headaches he was having and the dizziness and the anxiety, he was still, if you notice in Ben in the exhibit, he's smiling in every single picture. And we talk about perseverance. I mean, that's incredibly brave. Not only that, and Ben, to seek treatment in an era where men did not admit that they were weak psychologically is incredibly brave, incredibly strong. Ben had, we're talking about society now in these slides with Dr. Herman. I don't think society was helping Ben in this regard. I think we're a lot more understanding of what post-trauma is. And also you have to keep in mind the German government, and when Ben and his mother were seeking reparations payments for their suffering, some justice, the German government was forcing them to articulate in detail their suffering. So in a way, that's like they had to re-experience all this trauma. How brave and strong must you be to sort of endure this, not once, but twice, through their documentation during the reparations effort. And this is something we focused on in the exhibit. This very lengthy, decades-long process that Ben and his mother had to do by articulating. They asked the mother, prove to me your son was shot in a pit near Vadvaliskas, Lithuania. And she had to, we've all visited the letter there where she's just like, I can't prove my son was killed because anybody who was there when he was killed was also killed. So screw you, So these are all triggers, and these are all, it's an incredibly brave choice, I think, at the end of the day, for both Rosie and especially for Ben to seek treatment and seek justice the way they both have. For this slide, and we're almost done with the slides, and we're going to get to your written responses. Let's think about Rosie for this one. Those who attempt to describe the atrocities that they have witnessed also risk their own credibility. Think about when Rosie was sexually abused by her half-brother. What happened when Rosie spoke out about that? Does anyone remember from me? Yes, sir.
She was beaten by her mother, her other brother who he liked a lot. He told her wrong story about, they make their own story against her, and that makes her so much humiliated, mostly.
So it's like when Rosie attempted to sort of report what was happening, she was almost rebuffed and thwarted. It was like it was a humiliation on top of a sexual assault, or it was abuse on top of abuse.
Like it's this humiliation. The other way, the people are always centered about their mother. Her mother is the most abusing person in that, but she don't want her anyway. So feel like she's so much neglected. She feel like she's not deserved here, but she have to stick with that. It's just like in and out position, like her mental and physical, bothly she got abused.
The point you're making can't be underestimated, and thank you very much. When we think about safety, we think about what's the first word that comes to mind? Mama. And when you are abused, and you're looking for your mother for help, like Rosie did, and then she comes back and re-abuses you, that's extremely traumatic. That's an abandonment of the highest order, where your own mother won't even protect you from sexual abuse from your half-brother. And not only that, insults you, calls you too ugly to be raped. I mean, that's one of the reasons I didn't want to get into who suffered more, Ben or Rosie. I mean, Ben himself was betrayed by his countrymen, you know. His country turned on him, turned on the Jews, helped the Nazis kill many of the Jews. About 87% of the Jews in Lithuania were killed with help from Ben's countrymen, country people. That's a betrayal as well. Very good. And this is exactly what we're talking about. This next quote from Dr. Herman. So we have this parental love that's now been corrupted and that continues the cycle of abuse. And so we end with this one thought, and I think this is, and Dr. Herman says this is an unanswerable question. Why do these atrocities happen? Why do these traumas have to happen? And I suppose it's part of the human condition because it's been happening throughout human history. That's the best answer I can give. But Dr. Herman here says the answer is beyond human comprehension as to why these traumas and atrocities continue to happen. Does anyone have any thoughts on this very large, we're going to end with this very large philosophical question. Does anyone want to chime in on, in terms of helping somebody of trauma try and understand why did this happen to me? Does anyone have thoughts about why humans abuse one another? Why wars continue to happen? Why rape continues to happen? Why empathy can't seem to win over hate or understanding? Does anyone have a larger, and even if you don't speak up now, I think this is something I want you to focus on when we write. We're about to start the writing process, and I have a few writing prompts. Did anyone have any thoughts on this very big question? There's a big ticket item here. Why? Yes. Thank you so much. This is Flo. This is my student. Proud of you. Proud of you.
Well, I think the reason why things seem to happen this way is just like sometimes people feel like they want to prove themselves than others, like they want to try to be perfect than others, instead of try to work together, put it together, work together to change the society. So what is happening is because like every country wants to be better than others. Like people fight to prove a point, but they don't really see the reality that there's no point to be proving, just like to work together, make the world a better place. That's why I think like hate it's stronger than sympathy for others.
Wow.
People show like, instead of showing compassion, like feel like connected with each other, care for each other, they don't seem that way. They're just like, they want to think about themselves, do what they want to do, instead of helping others who need the help.
You know, it's hard to listen. You know, listening is one of the things that I focus on in my classes. And you're in my advanced reading class and my English 101 class. And one of the things we focus on in our classes is our ability to listen. And when we read, we're actually performing the act of listening. And so and when Dr. Lesham has these events where the Holocaust survivors can speak with you, and many of you here have already spoken to Holocaust survivors here, you know, the act of listening is a very powerful one, but I think it's not something society in general is very good at doing. And as you're pointing out, it's easy to want to like control a discussion or try and control the agenda or the politics of things. And it's much harder to listen and try and understand somebody where they're coming from to try and find compromise or common ground. Okay, so I have, if the instructors could come up, I have writing pads and Post-it notes, and I wanted to frame, I gave 5 sample writing prompts, and we're going to write for 15 minutes. And I'll go through each of these really quickly while you're getting your pen and paper. Feel free to reflect on anything we've discussed, or if you didn't maybe want to speak out loud, maybe you can articulate your thoughts and reflections in your writing right now. And you can use poetry, You can use creative writing. You can use regular prose to respond. And what I want to do is put your writing on the wall in the back of the exhibit. Okay, so I want you to be part of this exhibit. So let's write for 15 minutes. Here's some writing prompts that I thought of off the top of my head. But if you want to deviate and choose and respond in a way that you want to, that's fine. 1, what do you think motivated Ben and Rosie to seek treatment for their trauma? We talked about elements of justice with this. 2, do you think society is improving its understanding and empathy towards victims of trauma? Compare Ben's generation with Rosie's generation in this regard. So what challenges did Ben have that Rosie didn't in terms of seeking treatment? Number 3, do you feel the process of recovering from trauma is part of the pursuit of justice? Compare Rosie and Ben in this regard. Number 4, how is one's identity or sense of self altered or changed after choosing or not choosing to speak out after suffering trauma? That's one thing we didn't really talk about today. The millions of people who choose not to seek treatment or are too ashamed to or don't have the safety to do so or the resources to do so. How do you think that changes their sense of self? And lastly, do you think Ben's decision to keep his jacket from Dachau was the first step in the process of recovering from his trauma? Now remember, like when Dachau was liberated by the American troops in 1945, then and there, Ben decided to keep his jacket. Do you think that was his first step at recovery? So maybe you can reflect on that. Okay, so your instructors and I will be coming around and helping you get, if you're stuck, getting you unstuck. A simple paragraph would be fine. Let's hear from 2 or 3 of you. Can we hear what you wrote? And it's okay maybe if you're not finished. I think the point you're making can be made at this point. There are central themes running through your writing that I can already distinguish. Would anyone like to share? Let's hear from 2 or 3. Yes, ma'am. Okay, we got a microphone coming. You got another one? Okay.
Thank you. From the quote that we saw in the beginning, recovery begins always with safety. I wrote that both Ben Perez and Rosie had to suffer silently and physically for years before being able to seek help or feel comfortable enough to admit they needed it. Only when pushed to selective silence did they feel the need to speak out.
Can you read that last sentence one more time?
Only when pushed to selective silence did they feel the need to speak out.
It's almost poetic in nature. That was like, I love the way you framed that. Why did you respond so, why did that initial quote speak to you so powerfully that you had a response like that? What was it about that notion of safety that you wanted to respond to?
Because safety is often a form of perspective, because people can be safe and not feel safe. Like Ben Perez got out of the camp that he was in, but every minute he was looking over his shoulder, waiting for bad things to happen.
Amen. Amen.
Like how he perceived the doctors to be Nazis, even though he was safe and he knew he was free, he still believed he was in some form of danger.
Right. Yeah, you're playing ball now. You're doing college level things right now. College level. It's very good. Everybody is here. That's why this is such a cool event. I want to hear from you guys. Yes, next.
So one of my students asked me to read it. One's identity can change if they don't speak out. Some people can blame themselves and become closed off. Anyone who suffered a trauma and decides to not seek help risks not trusting people like they would want to.
Yes, and at the same time, I would never blame somebody for not getting treatment, you know? You almost understand why you could easily understand and empathize with somebody who doesn't want to come out with it like Rosie or Ben did, you know? You would completely understand, and I agree with you. That's the nature of trauma, though. It's it's devastating. I think you're just pointing towards how devastating trauma can be. Even if you seek treatment, like in Ben's case, he was still suffering. He was maybe suffering a little less, and he might have felt better about himself for doing it. And he did get reparations for his some justice for his suffering. But at the end of the day, trauma is trauma, and it's a devastating thing. Thank you so much. One more. No pressure. The last one usually is the best one. Going once, going twice. One more? Okay. First, those who signed consent, if you could follow Professor Yee and Chimino and Susan Madera and take your piece of writing and your things and go to the back of the gallery to put your writing on the wall. If you still need to finish it, you can finish your last sentence right now, but those who are ready, please follow Susan Madera or Professor Yee or Professor Chimino to the back of the gallery. Find a good spot on the wall, and then tape your writing to the wall. And I'll join you in about 5 minutes.